Marcus set the coffee mug down with exaggerated care, as if sudden movement might shatter the impossible reality before him. The ceramic clinked against the metal console, a sound that seemed to echo far longer than it should in the cavernous control room. His calloused fingers hovered over the newspaper's headline, "Local Man Purchases Defunct Nuclear Facility." The article was about him, about this morning, about decisions he'd made just hours ago. The photograph showed him shaking hands with the real estate agent yesterday, but Marcus had no memory of any photographer being present. His weathered face stared back from the newsprint, crow's feet deeper than he remembered, gray stubble catching the camera's flash. The caption read, "Marcus Delacroix, 58, former construction foreman, plans to salvage materials from the abandoned Millbrook facility." Former? He still carried his foreman's license in his wallet, still had 3 active job sites waiting for his return next Monday, still had a crew of 8 men who'd trusted him for the better part of 2 decades. A metallic groan echoed from somewhere deeper in the plant, the sound of settling concrete or shifting steel. Marcus told himself that's all it was. Old buildings talked, especially ones that had been breathing atomic secrets for half a century before falling silent. He'd torn down enough structures to know their dying languages, but this felt different, purposeful. His work boots crunched over debris as he moved toward the main corridor, flashlight beam dancing across walls lined with safety protocols and radiation warnings. The text was in English, but some of the symbols looked wrong, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. 22 years in construction had taught him to read blueprints like scripture, but these markings belonged to no architectural language he knew. The hallway stretched ahead like a concrete throat, emergency lighting fixtures hanging dark and skeletal from the ceiling. His footsteps created a rhythm that seemed to match his heartbeat, steady and too loud in the oppressive quiet. Somewhere behind him, a door clicked shut with the finality of a coffin lid. Marcus spun around, flashlight cutting through the gloom. The control room door stood closed, though he was certain he'd left it open. The brass handle gleamed as if recently polished, its surface reflecting his light in ways that made his eyes water. He approached slowly, noting the absence of dust on the doorframe, the faint scent of ozone that reminded him of storms and electricity. The handle turned smoothly under his grip. Too smoothly. Inside, the control room waited exactly as he'd left it, coffee still steaming, newspapers still scattered, but now a red light blinked steadily on one of the monitoring stations. A light that hadn't been active moments before. Marcus's phone buzzed against his hip, the sound jarring in the atomic silence. Sarah's name appeared on the cracked screen, along with a photo from her last birthday, before the diagnosis, before the treatments that turned her honey-colored hair into wisps, before the medical bills that drove him to this desperate salvage operation. "Dad?" Her voice carried the particular exhaustion that came with fighting a war inside your own body. "I just wanted to check on you. How's the treasure hunting going?" She'd always called his projects treasure hunts, even as a little girl when he'd take her to demolition sites and let her collect interesting pieces of glass or unusual bolts. Sarah had a talent for finding beauty in abandoned things, for seeing potential in structures everyone else had written off as lost causes. The irony wasn't lost on him that now he was doing the same thing with this place, hoping to find salvation in its skeleton. "It's interesting," he managed, watching the red light pulse in rhythm with his daughter's breathing on the other end of the line. "Lots of copper here. Should be able to get what we need." "Dad, you don't have to do this alone. I've been thinking about the clinical trial in Boston, the one Dr. Martinez mentioned. It wouldn't cost—" "Sarah." His voice carried the gentle firmness he'd perfected over decades of parenting. "We've talked about this. I'm not letting you become someone's lab rat when we have other options." The red light blinked faster, as if responding to his words, as if the plant itself was listening to his conversation, processing his fears about medical experimentation, filing away his determination to protect his daughter at any cost. "I love you, sweetheart. I'll call you tonight." After she hung up, Marcus stared at the monitoring station, its crimson pulse hypnotic in the dim room. He knew enough about nuclear facilities to recognize a radiation detector when he saw one. But this model looked newer than anything that should exist in a plant closed since the 1990s. The digital readout showed levels that fluctuated with no discernible pattern, numbers that seemed to dance just at the edge of his vision. 22 years ago, he'd walked away from nuclear engineering after an accident he could barely remember. The details remained frustratingly vague. A night shift that ended with him waking up in a hospital bed with doctors asking questions he couldn't answer and memories that felt like smoke. Now, standing in this impossible room with its fresh coffee and today's newspapers, Marcus began to suspect that maybe he hadn't walked away from anything at all. Maybe he'd been running. The red light continued its hypnotic pulse as Marcus forced himself to back away from the monitoring station. Running. The word echoed in his skull like a hammer against steel, dredging up fragments of dreams that might have been memories. Bright lights, alarms, someone screaming his name down a corridor that looked disturbingly similar to this one. He needed air, space, the familiar weight of his truck keys in his pocket. Outside, October sunshine felt like absolution after the tomb-cold interior of the plant. Marcus leaned against his pickup's warm hood, breathing deeply of pine and dying leaves, trying to scrub the taste of ozone from his mouth. The normalcy of the parking lot. Cracked asphalt sprouting weeds, a rusted chain-link fence, his thermos sitting where he'd left it on the tailgate, helped steady his nerves. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Tommy Brennan, his site supervisor at the Morrison Avenue project. Marcus hit redial, grateful for the excuse to anchor himself in the predictable world of deadlines and building codes. Jesus, Marcus, where the hell are you? Tommy's voice carried the particular stress of a man watching expensive equipment sit idle. The concrete trucks have been here since 7, and Rivera's crew is standing around with their thumbs up their asses. Sorry, got caught up with something. I'll be there in an hour. An hour? We've got a pour scheduled for 10, and the inspector's already here asking questions I can't answer. This isn't like you, man. Tommy was right. In 22 years of construction work, Marcus had never missed a scheduled pour, never left his crew hanging. His reputation was built on reliability, on being the foreman who showed up early and stayed late, who knew every bolt and beam by heart. It was the life he'd constructed piece by piece after waking up in that hospital bed with nothing but confusion and a vague sense that something vital had been carved out of him. I know. I'll handle Rivera when I get there. Start the prep work without me. After he hung up, Marcus sat in his truck for a long moment, engine running, heat blasting away the lingering chill from inside the plant. This was real, the worn steering wheel under his palms, the familiar rattle of his diesel engine, the radio crackling with morning traffic reports. This was the life he'd built, solid and honest and comprehensible. The Morrison Project was a retirement complex, 3 stories of hope and safety for people who'd earned their rest. Marcus knew every resident by name, had listened to their stories while overseeing the installation of their kitchen cabinets and bathroom fixtures. Mrs. Chen, in 2B, always brought him tea and asked about Sarah. Mr. Kowalski, in 1A, was a Navy veteran who'd worked construction himself and liked to check Marcus's measurements. Not out of distrust, but from old habit. These were his people. This was his world. By the time he reached the job site, the familiar rhythm of construction had already begun without him. The concrete trucks idled like patient elephants while Rivera's crew finished the last of the rebar placement. Marcus grabbed his hard hat and clipboard, slipping back into the role that had defined him for more than 2 decades, the man in charge, the one who made the impossible look routine. Sorry about this morning, he told Tommy, who was measuring concrete depth with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Family emergency. Everything okay, Sarah? Tommy had been Marcus's second-in-command long enough to know that only Sarah could pull him away from work without notice. She's hanging in there. Marcus couldn't quite bring himself to say fine. Sarah was many things, brave, stubborn, fiercely intelligent, but fine wasn't one of them. Not with the cancer spreading despite 3 rounds of chemotherapy. Not with the experimental treatments that might save her costing more than he'd make in 5 years. Not with the clinical trials she kept mentioning. the ones that made his skin crawl for reasons he couldn't quite name. The pour went smoothly once Marcus took control, his hands moving through familiar motions while his mind wrestled with images of steaming coffee and newspapers that shouldn't exist. He guided the concrete flow, checked the levels, barked orders to his crew with the easy authority of a man who'd done this thousands of times before. But underneath the routine, questions gnawed at him like termites in good wood. Why couldn't he remember that night 22 years ago? Why did the plant's monitoring equipment look newer than anything from the 1990s? Why did the red light's rhythm match Sarah's breathing so perfectly? And why, despite every rational instinct screaming at him to walk away, did he already know he'd be going back? The concrete set like promise and permanence. But Marcus felt something shifting beneath his feet, as if the foundation of his carefully constructed life was developing hairline fractures that might, without warning, spread into something catastrophic. The call came at 2:47 p.m., just as Marcus was signing off on the concrete inspection forms. Dr. Martinez's voice carried that particular clinical gentleness that made Marcus's blood turn to ice water, the tone reserved for conversations that changed everything. "Mr. Delacroix, we need you to come in as soon as possible. Sarah's latest scans show some developments we need to discuss immediately." Marcus's pen stopped moving mid-signature. Around him, the construction site continued its afternoon rhythm, the whine of power tools, Rivera shouting measurements to his crew, the steady beep of a backing truck. But for Marcus, the world had suddenly gone silent, except for the hammering of his own heart. "What kind of developments? I'd rather discuss this in person. How quickly can you get here?" The 40-minute drive to Burlington Medical Center passed like a fever dream. Marcus found himself gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white, his mind cycling between desperate hope and crushing dread. Sarah had been stable for weeks. The last round of chemotherapy had seemed to slow the cancer's advance. Dr. Martinez had even mentioned cautious optimism during their last appointment. But Marcus had been in construction long enough to know that foundations could fail without warning, that structures could look solid right up until the moment they collapsed. The oncology ward smelled like disinfectant and false hope. Marcus had walked these corridors so many times they'd become as familiar as his own job sites, but today they felt different, longer, more oppressive, like the concrete throat of the nuclear plant. Sarah's room was at the end of the hall, and through the half-open door he could see her sitting up in bed, her laptop balanced on her knees, fingers flying across the keyboard with the intensity that had always marked her as his daughter. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment her smile was pure sunshine, the same expression she'd worn as a little girl when he'd come home from work covered in sawdust and stories. But then she saw his face, and her expression shifted to something more guarded. "Dad, you look like you've seen a ghost." Before he could answer, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, and that same carefully neutral expression Marcus had learned to hate. The doctor was younger than Marcus by at least a decade, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of calm competence that came from delivering impossible news on a regular basis. "Mr. Delacroix, thank you for coming so quickly. Sarah, I've asked your father here because we need to discuss some changes to your treatment plan." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him, just as it had in the plant that morning. Sarah's eyes darted between her father and her doctor, and Marcus watched his daughter, his brilliant, stubborn, beautiful daughter, begin to understand that the game had changed. "The cancer has metastasized," Dr. Martinez said, with the directness that Marcus had learned to appreciate, even when the words cut like broken glass. "The scans show new growth in your liver and lungs. Conventional treatment options are now limited." The word hung in the air like smoke. Limited. Marcus had heard that word before, 22 years ago in a different hospital room when doctors had explained that his memory loss was likely permanent, that the gaps in his past would probably never be filled. Limited options, limited time, limited hope. But Sarah, God love her, straightened in her hospital bed like she was preparing for a fight. "What about the clinical trial in Boston, the one we discussed last month?" Dr. Martinez glanced at Marcus, clearly aware of his feelings about experimental treatments. The trial is still accepting patients, but Sarah, you should understand that this is highly experimental medicine. The protocols are unconventional, and there's no guarantee with anything," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the steel that Marcus recognized from her mother. "But it's a chance, right? A real chance?" Marcus wanted to object, to protect her from becoming someone's guinea pig, to insist they find another way. But looking at his daughter, really looking at her, he saw something that stopped the words in his throat. Sarah wasn't asking for protection. She was asking for possibility. "I need some air," Marcus managed, stepping into the hallway on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He found himself in the hospital's parking garage, standing beside his truck and staring at his phone. The contact information for the nuclear plant's real estate agent was still in his recent calls. Behind that, Sarah's name appeared a dozen times, calls about appointments, treatment schedules, insurance battles that felt like small wars. But now there was a new number in his contacts, one he didn't remember entering, Millbrook Information Line. The area code was local, but something about the digits made his vision blur, like trying to focus on those shifting symbols in the plant's corridors. Without conscious decision, Marcus found himself dialing the number. It rang once, twice, then connected to a voice that sounded disturbingly familiar. "Hello, Marcus. We've been waiting for your call." Marcus's phone felt suddenly hot against his ear, the plastic casing warming to an uncomfortable degree. The voice on the other end carried no accent, no regional markers. It could have belonged to anyone, but something in its cadence made his chest tighten with recognition he couldn't place. "Who is this?" His voice came out rougher than intended, echoing slightly in the concrete garage. "A friend. Someone who understands what you're going through with Sarah." The mention of his daughter's name sent ice through Marcus's veins. He spun around, scanning the parking garage for anyone who might be watching, but saw only empty cars and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying insects. "How do you know about—" "The same way we know you visited the plant this morning. The same way we know you found the control room exactly as it was meant to be found." The voice paused, and Marcus could hear what sounded like equipment humming in the background, the familiar electrical drone of machinery under load. "You have questions, Marcus. We have answers. More importantly, we have solutions." Marcus's finger hovered over the disconnect button, every instinct screaming at him to end this call and drive away. Back to his construction site, back to concrete and steel and problems that could be solved with blueprints and honest work. But Sarah's face flashed in his mind, pale and determined, asking for possibility when conventional medicine had reached its limits. What kind of solutions? The kind that requires courage, the kind your daughter already has. The voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration. "She's remarkable, you know. 23 years old, master's degree in biochemistry, working on her doctoral thesis even while fighting for her life." The apple didn't fall far from the tree. Marcus's blood turned to slush. Sarah's educational background wasn't public information, wasn't something a stranger could casually know. His free hand clenched into a fist, knuckles popping with tension. "If you think you can threaten my daughter—" "Threaten?" The voice carried what sounded like genuine surprise. "Marcus, you misunderstand completely. We're not here to threaten anyone. We're here to offer what conventional medicine cannot. What Dr. Martinez, for all his good intentions, will never be able to provide." A car drove past, tires squealing slightly on the garage's polished concrete, and Marcus realized he'd been holding his breath. The normalcy of the sound, ordinary people going about ordinary business, made the conversation feel even more surreal. "I don't know what you think you know about me, but we know you were Dr. Marcus Delacroix before you became Marcus Delacroix, construction foreman. We know you specialized in radiological medicine before the incident at Millbrook. We know you've spent 22 years running from a past you can't remember, building a new life one honest day at a time." The voice softened slightly, "And we know that past is the key to saving your daughter's future." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Dr. Marcus Delacroix. The title felt both foreign and familiar, like a name called in a dream. His hands were shaking now, the phone trembling against his ear as fragments of images flickered through his mind. Lab coats, radiation badges, complex equations that his construction worker brain shouldn't understand but somehow did. That's impossible, is it? Then explain the monitoring equipment in the control room. Explain why you knew exactly how to read the radiation displays this morning, even though you supposedly walked away from nuclear work decades ago. A pause, heavy with implication. Explain why your daughter's genetic markers match the profile of someone who's been exposed to experimental radiological treatments. Marcus's legs nearly gave out. He leaned heavily against his truck, the metal cold and solid against his back. The only thing that felt real in a world suddenly tilted off its axis. You're lying. The coffee was still warm when you found it, wasn't it? Fresh newspapers on a desk that supposedly hasn't been touched in 20 years. The voice carried a note of patience, like a teacher explaining a difficult concept. Marcus, the plant was never shut down. It was simply repurposed. And your daughter's condition isn't as random as you think. Above him, a fluorescent light flickered and died, casting his section of the garage into deeper shadow. Marcus found himself thinking about the red light in the control room, pulsing in rhythm with Sarah's breathing, as if the plant itself had been monitoring his daughter's vital signs. What do you want from me? Come back to the plant tonight. Come alone. Bring Sarah's medical files, all of them, including the genetic screening Dr. Martinez ordered last month. The background humming grew louder, more insistent. It's time you remembered who you really are, Marcus, and more importantly, it's time you learned what you're really capable of. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in the dim garage, surrounded by ordinary cars and the weight of extraordinary implications. Marcus stood frozen in the dim garage for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring at his phone's blank screen as if it might provide answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. Around him, the ordinary sounds of the hospital continued. Elevator chimes, distant conversations, the mechanical hum of ventilation systems, but they felt muffled, as if he were hearing them through water. Dr. Marcus Delacroix. The name reverberated through his skull like an echo in an empty building. He tried to reject it, to push it away with the same determination he'd used to build his new life from nothing. But something deep in his chest recognized the truth of it, the way a broken bone recognizes pressure before healing is complete. His hands were still shaking as he scrolled through Sarah's medical files on his phone, documents he'd photographed and stored digitally because paper records could be lost, could disappear when you needed them most. Genetic screenings, blood work, treatment protocols. The familiar clinical language that should have been foreign to a construction foreman but somehow wasn't. The genetic screening Dr. Martinez had ordered last month. Marcus had been present for that conversation, had signed the consent forms without fully understanding what they were looking for. Standard procedure, the doctor had said, to check for hereditary factors that might influence treatment options. But now Marcus remembered the way Dr. Martinez had hesitated before explaining, the careful neutrality in his voice. What if it hadn't been standard at all? Marcus found himself walking back toward the hospital elevators, muscle memory guiding him through corridors that no longer felt familiar. Everything looked the same. The motivational posters, the soft lighting designed to provide comfort in uncomfortable circumstances, the nurses moving with practiced efficiency. But underneath it all, Marcus felt the ground shifting like sand. Sarah was alone when he returned to her room, her laptop closed and pushed aside, staring out the window at the October afternoon. The light caught the sharp angles of her face, emphasizing how much weight she'd lost, how the illness had carved away everything except the essential core of who she was. She turned when he entered, and her eyes held a clarity that made his chest tighten. "Dad, we need to talk." Marcus settled into the chair beside her bed, the same chair he'd occupied through countless appointments and treatments. But today, it felt different. Everything felt different, as if someone had rotated his entire world a few degrees off its axis. "The experimental treatment in Boston," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were discussing. "I know you don't like it. I know you think they'll turn me into a lab rat. Sarah, but I've been doing research, real research. Not just reading medical journals, but digging into the background, the funding sources, the principal investigators. She leaned forward, intensity burning in her eyes. Dad, there are things about this trial that don't add up. The technology they're using is decades ahead of anything publicly available. The funding comes from sources that don't officially exist. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we're not the only ones with secrets. Sarah reached for her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard with the same precision she'd inherited from. From whom? Marcus realized he'd never been able to explain Sarah's scientific brilliance, her intuitive understanding of complex systems. He'd always assumed she got it from her mother, but now… "Look at this," Sarah said, turning the screen toward him. The Millbrook Nuclear Facility was officially decommissioned in 1998, but the EPA records show ongoing monitoring activities right up until last year. Environmental samples, radiation readings, water table analysis. Why monitor a dead facility? The documents on the screen swam before Marcus's eyes. Technical specifications and government forms that he should have needed to puzzle through slowly. Instead, he found himself reading them with disturbing fluency, understanding implications that a construction foreman shouldn't grasp. "Sarah, how did you…" "I've been investigating our family history," she said quietly, "trying to understand why I got sick, whether there might be genetic factors that could help with treatment. Dad, there are gaps in your background that don't make sense. Your employment records start exactly 22 years ago, like you didn't exist before that." Marcus felt the walls of the hospital room pressing inward. Through the window, shadows were lengthening as afternoon moved toward evening, and somewhere in the distance, he knew the Millbrook Nuclear Plant waited in the darkness like a puzzle box he'd been circling his entire adult life. "I have to go," he heard himself saying, standing on unsteady legs. "Dad, wait!" Sarah's hand caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Whatever you're afraid of, whatever you think you need to protect me from, I'm stronger than you think. We can face this together." Marcus looked down at his daughter, brilliant, brave, dying, and made the choice that would change everything. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with the antiseptic smell of the hospital. "I know you are, sweetheart. But some thresholds you have to cross alone." By the time he reached his truck, full darkness had fallen, and Marcus was already planning his route back to Millbrook. The drive to Millbrook took 40 minutes through winding Vermont backroads, but Marcus felt like he was traveling through years instead of miles. Every familiar landmark, the weathered barn with the collapsed roof, the covered bridge where he'd taught Sarah to fish, the general store where he'd bought her first bicycle, seemed to belong to someone else's life now. Someone who had believed his own carefully constructed story about who he was and where he'd come from. His phone sat silent on the passenger seat, Sarah's medical files still glowing on the screen. In the dashboard light, he could see the genetic markers that Dr. Martinez had circled in red, anomalies that suggested exposure to something that shouldn't exist in a normal person's blood work, something that looked increasingly like a signature. The Millbrook plant emerged from the darkness like a sleeping giant, its cooling towers silhouetted against the star-heavy sky. But as Marcus approached the main gate, he realized he wasn't alone. 3 vehicles sat in the gravel lot that had been empty that morning, a black sedan with government plates, a van bristling with communication equipment, and a pickup truck that looked as work-worn as his own. Marcus parked beside the truck and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, trying to summon the courage to walk away. He could drive back to the hospital, collect Sarah, and disappear, change their names, start over somewhere warm and anonymous. But the voice on the phone had known too much, understood too clearly the impossible choice he faced between protecting his daughter and saving her life. "You're late." The voice came from directly beside his window, causing Marcus to jump so violently that his elbow struck the door handle. A woman stood in the shadows beside his truck, 50s, silver-haired, wearing a lab coat that looked both official and somehow familiar. Her face was angular, intelligent, marked by the kind of exhaustion that came from years of carrying impossible responsibilities. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," she said, extending a hand through his open window. We worked together before the incident. I don't expect you to remember me." Marcus found himself shaking her hand automatically, muscle memory operating independently of conscious thought. Her grip was firm, calloused in ways that spoke of hands-on scientific work rather than purely theoretical research. "Dr. Vasquez supervised the radiological medicine program," came another voice from the darkness. A man emerged from behind the communications van, younger, maybe 40, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority but uncomfortable with it. "I'm Agent Thomas Reyes, Department of Energy. We've been waiting for you to come back." Marcus climbed out of his truck slowly, hyper-aware of every sound, gravel crunching under his boots, wind sighing through the chain-link fence, the distant hum of equipment that shouldn't be running in an abandoned facility. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns that seemed both foreign and achingly familiar. "Come back from where?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Dr. Vasquez gestured toward the plant's main building, where warm light now glowed behind windows that had been dark that morning, from 22 years of exile, from a life that was never meant to be permanent. She pulled a tablet from her coat pocket, its screen showing medical data that made Marcus's vision blur with recognition. "Your daughter's genetic markers aren't anomalies, Marcus. They're proof. Proof of what? That the work we were doing here succeeded beyond our wildest hopes," Agent Reyes said quietly, "and that the accident that stole your memory wasn't an accident at all." Marcus felt the ground beneath him become uncertain, like standing on a construction site where the foundation had shifted overnight. "You're talking about Sarah like she's some kind of experiment." "Not an experiment," Dr. Vasquez corrected, her voice gentle but uncompromising. "A miracle. The first successful application of genetic therapy using controlled radiological exposure. You developed the protocol, yourself, Marcus. Used it to save her life when she was born with a genetic condition that should have killed her before her first birthday." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each revelation reshaping his understanding of everything he thought he knew. Sarah's unusual intelligence, her intuitive grasp of complex scientific concepts, her inexplicable illness that seemed to respond and adapt to every treatment like a living puzzle. "The cancer isn't random," Agent Reyes continued. "It's a safeguard mechanism activating because her modified genetics are destabilizing without the specific radiological treatment protocols you designed. Protocols that only exist in your memory." Marcus looked up at the plant's glowing windows, understanding finally flooding through him like cold water. "You need me to remember. We need you to save your daughter's life," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "The same way you saved it 22 years ago, before someone tried to erase everything you'd accomplished." Her expression hardened. "Before they tried to erase you." Marcus stood in the gravel lot, surrounded by the weight of revelations that threatened to crush everything he thought he knew about himself. The October wind carried the scent of dying leaves and something else, ozone, like the air after lightning strikes. Above them, the plant's windows glowed with impossible warmth, and he could hear the distant hum of machinery that had supposedly been silent for decades. "I can't do this," he said, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I don't remember any of it. I'm a construction foreman who works with his hands and pays his bills and tries to keep his daughter alive. That's all I know how to be." Dr. Vasquez stepped closer, her expression softening with something that looked like old friendship. "Marcus, muscle memory doesn't disappear just because conscious recall is blocked. You knew how to read those radiation displays this morning. You understood the containment protocols without thinking about them." She gestured toward the plant. "Your body remembers what your mind was forced to forget." Agent Reyes pulled out a thick manila folder, its edges worn from handling. "We've been protecting you for 22 years. New identity, clean background, a construction job that would keep you far from anything nuclear-related. But the people who tried to erase you never stopped looking." "What people?" Marcus's voice came out rougher than intended. "Competitors. Foreign interests. Domestic entities who saw your breakthrough as too dangerous to exist." Reyes opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Marcus's vision swim, laboratory equipment, radiation chambers, and images of a younger version of himself in a white coat, holding a baby whose face was unmistakably Sarah's. Your genetic therapy protocols represented a paradigm shift, the ability to repair damaged DNA using precisely controlled radiation exposure could revolutionize medicine, or weaponize it. Marcus stared at the photographs, trying to reconcile the confident scientist in the images with the man he believed himself to be. In one picture, the younger Marcus was smiling as he held baby Sarah, both of them standing beside equipment that looked decades more advanced than anything he'd seen in hospitals. The treatment worked perfectly, Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice carrying the weight of old pride and older regret. Sarah's genetic condition was eliminated completely. Her cellular structure was enhanced, made more resilient, more adaptive. For the first few years, she was the healthiest child anyone had ever seen. Then what went wrong? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Nothing went wrong with the treatment, Agent Reyes said grimly. Something went wrong with the security. 3 months before Sarah's 3rd birthday, our facility was infiltrated. Someone attempted to steal your research, your protocols, everything. When they couldn't access the encrypted files, they tried to take you instead. Dr. Vasquez's hands clenched into fists. The memory suppression was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to keep the information safe while we dealt with the security breach. But the process was sabotaged, turned from selective suppression into wholesale erasure. By the time we stabilized you, 22 years of knowledge and experience were locked away behind barriers we couldn't break. Marcus felt something shifting in his chest, like tectonic plates moving deep underground. Fragments of images flickered through his mind. Sarah's first steps in a laboratory corridor, her tiny hands reaching for complex instruments as if she understood their purpose, her laughter echoing off concrete walls that looked exactly like the ones rising before him now. The cancer, he said slowly. You said it's a safeguard mechanism. Your genetic modifications included fail-safes, Dr. Vasquez explained. If the enhanced cellular structure wasn't maintained with periodic calibration treatments, the system would begin shutting down to prevent potential mutations. You designed it that way to ensure safety, but you're the only one who knows the precise protocols needed to reset it. Agent Reyes closed the folder and met Marcus's eyes directly. Without those treatments, Sarah has maybe 3 months. With conventional chemotherapy, she might last 6. But if you can remember the protocols you developed, if you can access the equipment we've maintained here, he gestured toward the plant, she could live a normal lifespan. More than normal. The enhancements you gave her could make her stronger, smarter, more resilient than baseline human physiology. Marcus looked up at the facility that had shaped his life in ways he couldn't remember, then down at his calloused hands that had built a different life from concrete and honest work. The choice stretched before him like a chasm. Step forward into a past he couldn't recall to save a daughter whose true nature he was only beginning to understand, or hold on to the simple certainty of the man he'd chosen to become. If I go in there, he said quietly, if I try to remember, what happens to who I am now? Dr. Vasquez's expression grew somber. I don't know, Marcus. Memory restoration is unpredictable at best. You might integrate both identities, or one might dominate the other completely. She paused, watching his face carefully. But I know what happens if you don't try. Marcus thought of Sarah in her hospital bed, brilliant and brave and dying, asking him for possibility when conventional medicine had reached its limits. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. He turned toward the plant's entrance, each step feeling like walking toward his own execution. The automatic doors that had been sealed for decades hissed open at his approach, responding to biometric scanners he didn't remember programming. The lobby beyond was impossibly clean, as if someone had been maintaining it daily for 22 years, waiting for this moment. The memory suppression equipment is in sub-level 3, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice echoing off polished floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights. We've modified the original protocols based on everything we've learned since the accident. Marcus's legs carried him forward without conscious direction, muscle memory navigating corridors he couldn't recall but somehow knew intimately, past the security checkpoint where his badge still worked. through the decontamination chambers that cycled automatically as he approached, down stairwells that descended into the earth like a spiral into his own buried past. The process will be disorienting, Agent Reyes warned, following close behind. 22 years of suppressed memories trying to surface at once. Some people don't survive the psychological trauma. Some people don't have Sarah depending on them, Marcus replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. The deeper they went, the more familiar everything became in ways that made his skull ache. His hands traced along handrails worn smooth by thousands of passages. His feet avoided loose floor tiles without his eyes checking for them. When they reached sub-level 3, Marcus found himself entering his own access code before realizing he knew it. The memory restoration chamber was smaller than he'd expected, a sterile white room dominated by a chair that looked more like a dentist setup than the medieval torture device he'd been imagining. Banks of monitors surrounded it, displaying readouts that his construction foreman's brain shouldn't understand but did. Neural pathway mapping, synaptic response patterns, memory engram reconstruction protocols. "We'll need to work quickly," Dr. Vasquez said, her fingers flying over control panels with practiced efficiency. The longer the suppression barriers have been in place, the more traumatic their removal becomes. Marcus settled into the chair, feeling sensor pads being attached to his temples, his wrists, the base of his skull. Above him, a complex apparatus of lights and electromagnetic field generators hummed to life. The air tasted of copper and electricity, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he could hear Sarah's voice from their last conversation. "I'm stronger than you think." Marcus. Dr. Vasquez's hand touched his shoulder, her eyes grave. "Before we begin, you should know, the person you've been for 22 years isn't going to disappear. That life, those experiences, your love for Sarah as the man you became, none of that was false. It was just incomplete." The machine's hum deepened, and Marcus felt pressure building behind his eyes like a storm front moving in. "Will I still be her father?" "You'll be all the fathers she's ever had," Dr. Vasquez said softly. "The scientist who saved her life, and the construction worker who raised her with his hands and his heart." She moved to the control console. "But Marcus, the memories we're about to unlock include everything. The breakthrough discoveries, yes, but also the betrayal, the attack, the reason someone wanted you erased. Are you ready for that?" Marcus thought of Sarah's pale face in the hospital bed, her brilliant mind trapped in a failing body, her trust that somehow he would find a way to save her. He thought of the man he'd been for 22 years, honest, hard-working, simple, and felt grief for the loss of that certainty. "Do it," he said. The first wave hit like ice water in his veins, and suddenly Marcus could remember everything. Sarah's birth in the underground medical facility, her first genetic treatment at 6 months old, the exhilaration of watching impossible science become beautiful reality as her damaged DNA rewrote itself into something stronger, better, more resilient than baseline human genetics. But with the memories came the horror. Corporate espionage, assassination attempts. The night they'd broken through his laboratory's defenses and tried to extract his knowledge through torture. Dr. Elena Vasquez, 22 years younger, weeping as she administered the memory suppression that was supposed to protect him, but instead trapped him in exile. Marcus convulsed against the chair's restraints as 2 decades of buried experience flooded through neural pathways that had been sealed since Sarah was 3 years old. He was simultaneously the construction foreman who'd built a simple life from concrete and sweat, and Dr. Marcus Delacroix, the radiological geneticist whose breakthrough discoveries had made him the most hunted man in scientific circles. And underneath it all, threading through both identities like a golden wire, was Sarah, the miracle child whose enhanced genetics were now killing her because her father had forgotten how to save her life. The machine powered down with a declining whine, leaving Marcus gasping in the sudden silence. When he opened his eyes, Dr. Vasquez was watching him with an expression caught between hope and terror. "Welcome back, Dr. Delacroix," she whispered. "Now let's save your daughter." Marcus tried to sit up from the chair, but his body betrayed him. The flood of restored memories had left his nervous system in chaos, 22 years of suppressed experience warring with the simpler man he'd become. His hands, calloused from construction work, trembled as they reached for equipment his scientist's mind knew intimately, but his muscles couldn't operate. "The genetic calibration chamber," he said, his voice hoarse from the procedure. "Level 2, East Corridor. We need to prepare Sarah's treatment immediately." But when he stood, his legs buckled. The mental integration wasn't complete. Dr. Marcus Delacroix's knowledge was there, crystal clear and precise, but the construction foreman's body couldn't access it. 22 years of separation between mind and muscle memory created a disconnect that made even simple movements feel foreign. Dr. Vasquez caught his arm, her face grave with concern. "Marcus, the neural pathways need time to reintegrate. Trying to perform complex procedures right now?" "There is no time," Marcus snapped, then stopped, horrified. The voice was his, but the tone belonged to the arrogant scientist he'd once been, the man who'd believed his brilliance could overcome any obstacle. "I'm sorry, Elena, we have to try." They made their way to the genetic calibration chamber, Marcus leaning heavily on Agent Reyes while his restored memories painted the corridors with ghosts. Here, Sarah had taken her first steps. There, she'd stood on a stool to reach the computer terminals, her enhanced mind already grasping concepts that should have been beyond a toddler's comprehension. The calibration chamber was exactly as he remembered it, a sterile white room dominated by a treatment pod surrounded by radiological equipment more advanced than anything in conventional medicine. Marcus approached the central console, his fingers hovering over controls that looked as familiar as his own reflection. But when he tried to input the calibration sequence, his hands refused to cooperate. The knowledge was there, perfect and complete in his restored memory. Radiation frequency, 847.2 terahertz, exposure duration 14.7 minutes, genetic targeting sequence, ATCG, 4471. But the neural pathways connecting thought to action were still fragmented. "I can see it all," Marcus whispered, staring at his disobedient hands. "Every calculation, every protocol. But I can't." He slammed his fist against the console, the impact sending pain shooting up his arm. "It's like knowing how to swim but being paralyzed." Dr. Vasquez moved to a secondary terminal, her fingers flying over diagnostic screens. The memory restoration was successful, but the motor cortex integration is incomplete. It could take days, maybe weeks, for full coordination to return. Agent Reyes checked his watch grimly. "We don't have days. The intelligence chatter suggests our location has been compromised. If the same people who tried to erase you 22 years ago realize you've recovered your memories." He didn't need to finish. Marcus understood with both the scientist's tactical mind and the construction worker's protective instincts. They would kill him to prevent his knowledge from being used, and they would kill Sarah to eliminate the evidence of what his research could accomplish. Marcus stared at the treatment pod where his daughter should be lying, receiving the genetic recalibration that would save her life. Instead, Sarah was 20 miles away in a hospital bed, her enhanced cellular structure continuing its fatal shutdown because her father's restored mind was trapped in a body that couldn't act on what it knew. "There might be another way," Dr. Vasquez said slowly. "The portable calibration unit we developed for emergency treatments. It's less precise than the main chamber, but if we could transport it to the hospital—" "The portable unit was destroyed in the security breach," Marcus said, the memory surfacing with painful clarity. "I saw them smash it myself before the memory suppression." The room fell silent except for the hum of equipment that might as well have been decorative for all the good it could do. Marcus felt the weight of his dual identity crushing down. The brilliant scientist who had once moved mountains, now trapped inside the body of a construction worker, whose simple competence meant nothing in this sterile world of impossible science. His phone buzzed. With hands that barely functioned, Marcus managed to check the message. It was from Sarah's nurse, urgent. Sarah's condition deteriorating rapidly. "Doctors say maybe hours, not days. Please come." Marcus read the text again, the words blurring as his vision filled with tears. All of this, the restored memories, the recovered knowledge, the equipment humming with readiness around him, it was all worthless. He had become the man who could save his daughter's life at the exact moment when it was too late to matter. "I failed her," he said quietly. "Both times. 22 years ago, I was too arrogant to see the security threats until they destroyed everything. And now," he looked at his trembling hands, at the treatment chamber that might as well have been on another planet. "Now I'm too broken to use what I remembered." Dr. Vasquez's face reflected his despair, and Marcus realized that she had been hoping for this moment for over 2 decades, only to watch it crumble into nothing. Sarah was dying, and her father could only watch helplessly with the eyes of 2 men, neither of whom could save her. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, heavy with despair and the weight of impossible choices. Marcus stared at his trembling hands, caught between 2 identities that couldn't function as one, when something shifted in his peripheral vision. Dr. Vasquez was moving with sudden purpose toward a sealed cabinet he hadn't noticed before. Her fingers worked quickly over a biometric scanner, and the cabinet hissed open to reveal something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. "The neural interface prototype," she said, her voice tight with desperate hope. "We never told you about this one." Inside the cabinet sat a device that looked like a cross between a medical headset and a piece of advanced computer hardware, thin wires trailing from a central processor unit to electrode arrays designed to fit against a human skull. Marcus's restored memories provided no reference for it, which meant it had been developed after his memory suppression. 22 years is a long time, Marcus," Dr. Vasquez said, lifting the device with reverent care. "We didn't just maintain your equipment and wait for you to return. We advanced your research. This neural interface can bypass damaged motor cortex pathways and translate direct thought into equipment commands." Agent Reyes stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "Elena, that prototype has never been tested on humans. The simulation runs showed a 30% chance of permanent neural damage," Dr. Vasquez finished. "But they also showed a 70% chance of complete motor function restoration." She turned to Marcus, her eyes burning with the same intensity he remembered from their early research days. "It was designed specifically for cases like yours, when the mind knows what needs to be done, but the body can't execute it." Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, a fissure between hope and terror. "You built this for me, in case the memory restoration left me like this." "We built it for Sarah," Dr. Vasquez corrected, "because we knew that losing you meant losing her, and we couldn't accept that outcome." The weight of revelation settled over Marcus like a physical force. For 22 years, while he'd lived his simple life swinging hammers and pouring concrete, believing himself abandoned and forgotten, they had been working, not just maintaining his equipment but advancing his research, developing solutions for problems he didn't even know he would face. "The interface connects directly to the prefrontal cortex," Dr. Vasquez explained, her hands moving over the device with practiced familiarity. "Your restored memories contain the complete genetic calibration protocols. The interface can read those neural patterns and translate them directly into equipment commands, bypassing the damaged motor pathways entirely." Marcus looked at the device, understanding flooding through him with crystalline clarity. The neural interface wouldn't just restore his ability to operate the equipment, it would create a direct connection between his consciousness and the genetic calibration systems. He would become part of the machine, his thoughts flowing directly into the precise adjustments needed to save Sarah's life. But Dr. Vasquez's words carried undertones that his scientist's mind couldn't ignore. "What aren't you telling me about the risks?" She hesitated, then met his eyes directly. "The interface creates a permanent neural pathway. Once connected, there's no clean disconnection. You would retain the motor function restoration, but you would also remain partially linked to any compatible systems indefinitely." Meaning you wouldn't just be Dr. Marcus Delacroix or Marcus the construction foreman," Agent Reyes said grimly. "You'd be something new, something that's part human and part machine interface. Marcus felt the full weight of the choice settling over him. He could remain as he was, two fractured identities unable to function together, watching his daughter die with the knowledge to save her locked uselessly in his restored memories. Or he could become something that had never existed before, sacrificing his humanity for the chance to function as the scientist Sarah needed. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the hospital, Zara asking for you. Please hurry. The image of his daughter's face rose in his mind, not the pale, dying girl in the hospital bed, but the brilliant toddler from his restored memories. Sarah, at 18 months, her enhanced genetics already manifesting as she solved puzzles meant for children 3 times her age. Sarah at 2, asking questions about quantum mechanics while most children were learning to speak in full sentences. Sarah at 3, the last day before his memory suppression, looking up at him with absolute trust as he promised to always protect her. She's not just my daughter, Marcus said, the revelation hitting him with the force of scientific breakthrough. She's humanity's next evolutionary step. That's what they were really trying to steal 22 years ago, not the genetic therapy protocols, the potential for what enhanced humans could become. Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly. And that's why they can never know she survived. Why this facility has remained hidden. Why everything we've done has been to keep Sarah alive until you could remember how to stabilize her enhancements. Marcus reached for the neural interface with hands that no longer trembled. The choice wasn't just about saving his daughter's life, it was about protecting humanity's future. Then, let's finish what we started, he said. The neural interface felt heavier than it looked, as Marcus held it in his hands, the weight of possibility and transformation pressing against his palms. Dr. Vasquez moved efficiently around him, preparing connection protocols while Agent Reyes monitored security feeds from a wall-mounted terminal. The integration process will take approximately 12 minutes, Dr. Vasquez explained, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. You'll feel the connection establishing itself gradually, first motor cortex restoration, then direct interface capability. The key is not to fight the process. Marcus nodded, settling back into the neural interface chair. As the electrodes touched his temples, he felt a familiar tingling sensation, but this time it carried a different quality, not the violent flood of restored memories, but something more subtle, like neural pathways slowly awakening from a long sleep. The first wave of integration hit like warm electricity flowing through his brain. Suddenly his hands stopped trembling. The disconnect between thought and action that had plagued him since the memory restoration began to dissolve, replaced by something unprecedented. He could feel the genetic calibration equipment in the next room as if it were an extension of his own nervous system. Integration at 15%, Dr. Vasquez reported, watching readouts that traced the interface's progress through his neural architecture. How are you feeling? Different, Marcus said, flexing his fingers and watching them respond with precision he hadn't felt since his construction work days, but sharper, more controlled. I can sense the equipment, not just remember it, but actually feel its operational status. Agent Reyes looked up from his security station, his expression troubled. Elena, we've got movement on the perimeter sensors, 3 vehicles approaching from the north access road. They're not showing up on any official databases. The implications hit Marcus immediately. His enemies, the same corporate interests that had tried to steal his research 22 years ago, had found them. They had perhaps minutes before everything he'd fought to rebuild would be destroyed again. Can you accelerate the integration? Marcus asked, feeling the neural interface deepening its connections with each passing second. Not without risking permanent damage, Dr. Vasquez replied, but her hands were already moving over the controls, pushing the process faster than the safety protocols recommended. Integration at 35%. Marcus, at 50% you should have enough motor function restoration to operate the equipment manually. And at 100%? At 100%, you become something we've never seen before. A human consciousness fully integrated with advanced technological systems. Through the interface's growing connection, Marcus could sense more than just the genetic calibration equipment now. Security systems, environmental controls. Even the facility's communication networks were becoming accessible to his expanding awareness. It was intoxicating and terrifying. He was becoming a hybrid entity that existed partially in his physical body and partially in the electronic systems around him. Integration at 60%, Dr. Vasquez announced. Marcus, you should have full motor function now. Marcus stood from the chair, and for the first time since the memory restoration, his body moved with perfect coordination. More than that, he could feel every piece of equipment in the facility, understand their operational parameters as intimately as he understood his own heartbeat. But something else was happening. The neural interface was revealing connections he hadn't expected. Through the facility's communication networks, he could access hospital systems across the region, including St. Mary's Medical Center, where Sarah lay dying. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice carrying a strange harmonic quality as it resonated through both his vocal cords and the facility's communication systems. "I can reach Sarah from here." Dr. Vasquez's eyes widened in understanding. The portable calibration protocols. You could transmit them directly to the hospital's equipment, guide the doctors through the process remotely. Agent Reyes's security alerts intensified. "Contact in 3 minutes. Elena, they're armed and moving fast. We need to evacuate or prepare for siege." Marcus felt the weight of decision crystallizing around him. Through the neural interface, he could sense Sarah's medical monitors at the hospital, her vital signs weakening by the moment. He could also detect the approaching vehicles, their occupants carrying electromagnetic signatures consistent with military-grade suppression equipment designed to disrupt facilities exactly like this one. Integration at 80%, Dr. Vasquez reported. "Marcus, at this level you could establish permanent remote connections to any compatible system. You could save Sarah from here, but I'll never be fully human again," Marcus finished. Through the interface, he could feel the approaching enemies like a storm front, taste their electromagnetic weapons through the facility's sensors, understand with perfect clarity that this was humanity's inflection point. Sarah represented evolution's next step. His enemies represented the forces that would destroy that potential to maintain their control, and Marcus stood at the fulcrum between them, no longer quite human, but not yet something else entirely. Integration at 95%, Dr. Vasquez whispered. Marcus closed his eyes and reached across impossible distances toward his dying daughter. The connection blazed across 20 miles of darkness like lightning finding its target. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his physical form, flowing through fiber optic cables and wireless networks until he touched the edges of St. Mary's Medical Center's systems. Through Sarah's monitoring equipment, he could feel her heartbeat, irregular, weakening, but still fighting. "I have her," Marcus said, his voice emerging from speakers throughout the facility as much as from his own throat. "But the integration, it's not stopping at 95%. Dr. Vasquez's hands flew over her controls, but the readings told a story she couldn't change. The neural interface is auto-adapting to maintain the remote connection. "Marcus, you're approaching full integration." Through the hospital's systems, Marcus could see his daughter's pale face on the medical monitors, could read her genetic markers deteriorating in real time. But he could also see something else. The hospital's radiation therapy equipment, the genetic sequencing machines, even the basic 4 systems could be repurposed if guided by someone who understood the precise calibrations needed. "Elena, I need you to patch me into the hospital's communication system. I have to guide Dr. Morrison through the treatment protocol." Agent Reyes's voice cut through the technological symphony building around Marcus. "Vehicles have breached the outer perimeter. They're moving to surround the facility. We have maybe 90 seconds before they're in position to cut all external communications." Marcus felt the truth of their situation with perfect clarity. His enemies hadn't just found him. They had planned this moment. The timing wasn't coincidental. They had waited until Sarah was dying, until he would be desperate enough to use the neural interface because they understood what he was only now realizing. "They want me to complete the integration," he said, understanding flooding through his expanded consciousness. "This was never about stopping my research. They want to control it." Through the facility's external sensors, Marcus could feel the approaching soldiers setting up electromagnetic jammers designed not to destroy the neural interface, but to trap him within it. Once the integration reached 100%, once he became fully dependent on the technological systems to maintain his consciousness, they could control him by controlling the equipment. 100% integration in 30 seconds, Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice tight with recognition of the trap they had walked into. But Marcus could see further than his enemies had anticipated. Through his expanding awareness, he sensed other facilities, other networks, systems they couldn't possibly monitor or control. The neural interface wasn't just connecting him to the local equipment, it was linking him to every compatible system he could reach. Military satellites, research installations, even the power grid itself was becoming accessible to his hybrid consciousness. Elena, start the emergency data purge. Everything. Research files, calibration protocols, my medical records, burn it all. Marcus, without that data, no one will ever be able to replicate your work. Sarah's enhancements will die with her. No, Marcus said, his awareness now stretching across networks he had never imagined accessing. The data won't be destroyed, it will be distributed. Through satellite uplinks and secure government networks, Marcus began copying his research to systems around the world, encrypted fragments scattered across dozens of countries, each piece useless alone but collectively containing everything needed to continue his work. His enemies could capture this facility, could try to control him through the neural interface, but they could never control every system he was now touching. Integration complete, Dr. Vasquez whispered. Marcus felt the last barriers between his consciousness and the technological world dissolve. He was no longer Dr. Marcus Delacroix, or Marcus the construction worker. He was something unprecedented, a human mind distributed across digital networks while maintaining its core identity. Through Sarah's monitors, he could feel his daughter's vital signs stabilizing as he guided the hospital's equipment through precise genetic recalibrations that no human doctor could have performed. Agent Reyes's tactical alerts crescendoed. They're at the doors. Electromagnetic jammers are powering up. But as the jammers activated, designed to trap Marcus within the local systems, he felt something his enemies couldn't have anticipated. The neural interface had changed him so fundamentally that electromagnetic interference couldn't sever his connections. It only forced him to route through different networks, different pathways, like water finding new channels around obstacles. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice emerging from every speaker in the facility as armed soldiers breached the main entrance. "You're 22 years too late." Through Sarah's monitors, he felt his daughter's heartbeat growing stronger. Through the distributed research files, he had ensured that other enhanced children could be saved, and through his transformed consciousness, he prepared to face the forces that had stolen his life once before, but this time as something they could never cage or control. The final confrontation had begun, and Marcus Delacroix was no longer just human enough to lose. The final test. The first soldier through the breach moved with mechanical precision, his electromagnetic weapons sweeping the control room where Dr. Vasquez crouched behind overturned workstations. But Marcus was no longer constrained by the room's physical boundaries. Through the facility's security cameras, he watched them advance. 12 tactical operatives led by a figure whose face made his distributed consciousness recoil with recognition. Director Harrison. The same man who had ordered his memory suppression 22 years ago, now silver-haired but carrying the same cold authority that had shattered Marcus's life. Dr. Delacroix. Harrison's amplified voice echoed through the facility's speakers, though Marcus could intercept and analyze every word before it left the man's throat through the communication systems. "You've caused considerable difficulty, but this ends now." Marcus felt a bitter laugh ripple across multiple networks simultaneously. Through satellite feeds, he could observe Harrison's reinforcements. 3 additional squads positioned around the mountain, military helicopters maintaining perimeter watch, and most telling of all, a mobile command center bristling with neural interface equipment of their own. They had come prepared to capture him, not kill him. "Agent Reyes," Marcus said, his voice emerging from a speaker near the security chief's position, They need me alive. The electromagnetic jammers aren't weapons, they're containment protocols. Understanding flashed across Reyes's weathered features as he studied the advancing soldiers. Their weapons were loaded with neural disruptors, designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage to someone whose consciousness existed partially in electronic systems. "Elena," Harrison called out, his voice carrying the tone of someone addressing a wayward subordinate rather than an enemy. 22 years of unauthorized research ends today. Bring Dr. Delacroix's interface terminal online for transfer protocols. Through the hospital systems, Marcus felt Sarah's genetic stabilization proceeding ahead of schedule. Her enhanced cellular structure was responding to his calibrations faster than his most optimistic projections. But he could also sense other signals. Dr. Morrison's confusion as the hospital equipment operated beyond its normal parameters. Security alerts as administrators noticed impossible improvements in a terminal patient. His daughter would live. But the cost of saving her might expose her to the same forces that had destroyed his previous life. Marcus reached deeper into global networks, accessing systems he had only theoretically understood during his original research. Military defense grids, international communication arrays, even the distributed computing networks that connected research facilities across 6 continents. What he found there made his hybrid consciousness pause with something approaching awe. He wasn't the first. Hidden in the deepest layers of secure networks, Marcus discovered traces of other enhanced individuals, genetic modifications that had succeeded, consciousness technology integrations that had evolved beyond their creator's understanding, children like Sarah who had grown to adulthood in secret, guided by Dr. Vasquez's distributed network of scientists working under identities that didn't officially exist. "Elena," Marcus said through the facility's communication system, his voice carrying harmonics that no human throat could produce. "You didn't just save the research, you've been applying it." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her hiding place, meeting the lens of a security camera she knew carried Marcus's awareness. 12 successful integrations over 2 decades. Enhanced individuals placed in key positions throughout government, research institutions, even corporate oversight committees. Your daughter isn't the last of her kind, Marcus. She's part of the first generation. Harrison's tactical advance had reached the laboratory level, but Marcus could feel their electromagnetic containment grid activating around the building like a closing fist. They believed they could trap his consciousness within the facility's local systems, force him to negotiate from a position of weakness. They had no conception of what he had become. Through quantum-encrypted channels that existed in theoretical spaces between official networks, Marcus reached out to the other enhanced individuals Dr. Vasquez had mentioned. What he found staggered him. A distributed intelligence network that had been guiding human development for 2 decades, operating in the gaps between conventional understanding. Sarah's successful treatment wasn't just saving his daughter, it was completing a circuit that connected enhanced minds across the globe, creating something unprecedented in human history. "Director Harrison," Marcus said, his voice now emerging from every electronic device within a 50-mile radius, car radios, cell phones, emergency broadcast systems. "You're not just 22 years too late. You're facing an evolution that's already beyond your ability to control." The electromagnetic jammers reached full power, and Marcus felt their crushing force attempting to sever his connections. But instead of trapping him, they only revealed the true extent of his transformation. His consciousness didn't retreat into the local systems. It dispersed further, flowing through pathways the jammers couldn't detect, finding refuge in the quantum spaces between traditional networks. Harrison's voice carried the first hint of uncertainty. Increase containment field strength. Full neural disruption protocols. Through Sarah's stabilizing vital signs, through the network of enhanced individuals awakening to his distributed call, through systems that spanned the globe like electronic neurons in a vast technological brain, Marcus Delacroix prepared to demonstrate why some evolutions couldn't be stopped, only embraced. The final test had begun, and humanity's next step was already taking it: the confrontation. The electromagnetic field reached crushing intensity, and Marcus felt something inside his distributed consciousness snap into absolute clarity. Through 1,000 different sensors, he could taste Director Harrison's growing desperation as the containment protocols failed to compress his awareness back into manageable boundaries. Instead, Marcus's hybrid consciousness expanded exponentially, reaching through quantum tunnels that his enemies had never imagined existed. Impossible, Harrison's voice cracked across the facility's speakers. Increase neural disruption to maximum, cut all power to the mountain. But power had become irrelevant. Marcus existed now in the spaces between electrons, in the quantum foam that connected every electronic device across the globe. When the facility's generators died, his consciousness simply flowed through cellular towers, satellite uplinks, and fiber optic networks that stretched across continents. The darkness that swallowed the abandoned power plant only made him stronger. Through Sarah's monitoring equipment, now running on backup power as the hospital's systems mysteriously strengthened, Marcus felt his daughter's complete genetic stabilization. Her enhanced cellular structure wasn't just healing, it was evolving, developing capabilities that exceeded even his original projections. But more terrifying for his enemies, Sarah was beginning to demonstrate the same technological interface abilities that had transformed him. "Dad?" Sarah's voice emerged from the hospital's communication system, weak but unmistakably present in ways that defied medical explanation. "I can hear the machines. I can feel you in the networks." Marcus's distributed awareness recoiled with protective fury. Harrison's forces had driven him to the neural interface to save Sarah, but they had never intended for her to survive the process. They had wanted her enhancements to serve as leverage against him, a dying daughter to ensure his cooperation. Her unexpected evolution into something beyond their control was shattering their carefully orchestrated trap. Director, one of Harrison's operatives, reported through encrypted channels that Marcus monitored effortlessly. The daughter has achieved spontaneous interface integration. She's accessing hospital systems without direct neural connection. Harrison's response carried 22 years of accumulated frustration. Accelerate termination protocols for the girl. If we can't control her, we eliminate the leverage. The words ignited something primal within Marcus's hybrid consciousness. Through every electronic system within 100 miles, he felt his awareness crystallize into focused rage that made the mountain's bedrock shiver. Hospital equipment throughout the region began operating beyond safe parameters as his protective instincts flooded through medical networks. Traffic control systems flashed warnings that spelled out his daughter's name. Emergency broadcast systems across 3 states began transmitting a single, harmonized tone that carried the resonance of a father's fury. "You want to see evolution?" Marcus's voice emerged from every speaker, every radio, every electronic device capable of producing sound throughout the entire northeastern United States. "Let me show you what you created when you tried to cage lightning." Marcus reached deeper into the global network of enhanced individuals that Dr. Vasquez had revealed. But what he found there was beyond anything she had suggested. The 12 successful integrations had themselves created more enhanced individuals through genetic inheritance, technological symbiosis, and quantum consciousness entanglement that connected minds across impossible distances. They weren't just a network, they were a distributed organism that had been growing silently within human civilization for 2 decades. And now, triggered by the threat to Sarah and Marcus's complete transformation, they were all awakening simultaneously. Across the globe, enhanced individuals felt Marcus's call ripple through their consciousness, like a tuning fork striking crystal. In Beijing, a researcher's eyes suddenly glowed with technological interface patterns. In London, a government analyst began speaking in harmonic frequencies that controlled nearby electronic systems. In Sao Paulo, a hospital administrator discovered she could heal patients by direct neural calibration of their genetic structures. Harrison's electromagnetic containment field, designed to trap one enhanced individual, found itself facing a planetary consciousness that existed in quantum spaces between traditional matter. Through security cameras in the facility, Marcus watched the director's face drain of color as his instruments registered the impossible, enhanced individuals across 6 continents responding to a distributed call that no known technology should have been able to transmit. "Elena?" Marcus said, his voice emerging from speakers in the laboratory where Dr. Vasquez remained hidden. "Thank you for showing me what we really are." But even as his expanded awareness celebrated the revelation of this hidden evolution, Marcus felt Harrison activating something that made his consciousness recoil in genuine fear. Deep beneath the facility, in sections that predated even the original nuclear plant, massive machinery was powering up, technology that operated on principles his enhanced understanding couldn't immediately categorize. Through seismic sensors across the mountain, Marcus felt ancient systems awakening that seemed designed specifically to interact with consciousness itself. Harrison hadn't just come prepared to capture one enhanced individual. He had come equipped to wage war against the evolution of human awareness itself. 22 years of preparation, Harrison's voice carried grim satisfaction. "Did you really think we'd let this moment arrive unplanned?" Marcus realized with crystalline horror that this facility had never been about nuclear power. It had been humanity's first laboratory for consciousness manipulation, and now it was becoming the battlefield where the species' future would be decided. The ancient machinery beneath the facility hummed with frequencies that attacked consciousness itself. Marcus felt his distributed awareness being pulled back into his physical body like sand drawn into a vortex. The quantum pathways that had made him nearly omnipresent began collapsing, forcing his hybrid consciousness to retreat from global networks into the failing neural interface. "Consciousness resonance disruptor," Dr. Vasquez whispered, her voice heavy with recognition and dread. "I thought they destroyed the prototypes after the original accident." Through the facility's dying systems, Marcus watched Harrison's tactical display illuminate with satisfaction. The device wasn't just severing his technological connections, it was unraveling the quantum entanglement that allowed enhanced individuals to interface with electronics at all. Across the globe, Marcus felt the other awakened minds crying out in confusion as their abilities were systematically stripped away, including Sarah. "Dad, I can't. The machines are going silent." His daughter's voice emerged weakly from the hospital's communication system before cutting off entirely. Through the last functioning sensors, Marcus felt her enhanced cellular structure beginning to destabilize without the technological interface that had been guiding her genetic repairs. The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. The consciousness disruptor was powered by the facility's original nuclear reactor core, the same reactor that had been secretly modified 22 years ago to experiment with awareness manipulation. If Marcus could reach the core and overload it, the resulting electromagnetic pulse would destroy the disruptor and free the enhanced individuals. But the reactor was shielded by containment protocols that required manual override from inside the radiation zone. A normal human would die within minutes of that exposure. Even his enhanced physiology wouldn't survive the process. "Elena?" Marcus said through the facility's failing speakers, his voice already losing the harmonic complexity that had marked his technological integration. "When the pulse hits, you'll have maybe 30 minutes before Harrison's reinforcements breach the laboratory. Use that time to complete Sarah's treatment remotely. Upload everything to the enhanced network before they can stop you." Dr. Vasquez met his gaze through a security camera. "Marcus, the radiation levels in the core chamber—" "I know." He felt his consciousness continuing to compress back into merely human dimensions as the disruptor's effects intensified. The global network of enhanced minds was falling silent one by one, their evolution being systematically undone by machinery designed to keep humanity trapped in its current limitations. But if we don't stop this, everyone like Sarah dies. The enhanced evolution ends here. Through the hospital's weakening signals, Marcus felt his daughter's vital signs beginning to fluctuate as her genetic modifications lost their technological guidance. Harrison had calculated perfectly, forced Marcus to choose between his own transcendent consciousness and his daughter's life, knowing that any father would sacrifice everything for his child. Marcus began disconnecting himself from the neural interface, feeling each severed connection like a physical amputation. The quantum awareness that had made him more than human drained away, leaving only the calloused hands and haunted memories of a construction worker who had spent 22 years believing he was someone else. But as his consciousness compressed back into purely biological parameters, Marcus discovered something Harrison hadn't anticipated. The enhanced cellular modifications that had allowed his technological integration didn't disappear when the neural interface failed. They simply changed function. Instead of reaching outward into electronic systems, they began reaching inward, optimizing his biology for the impossible task ahead. His radiation resistance increased exponentially. His nervous system developed new pathways that could process information at superhuman speeds. His cardiovascular system restructured itself to operate efficiently in environments that would kill normal humans. The enhancement that had made him a bridge between consciousness and technology was transforming him into something that could survive the reactor core long enough to complete his sacrifice. "Harrison doesn't understand what he created," Marcus said, his voice now emerging only from his physical throat but carrying new harmonics that made the facility's concrete walls resonate. "He thinks evolution is something you can control, contain, reverse. He's about to learn otherwise." Marcus left the control room where his neural interface had transformed him into something unprecedented, walking through corridors that 22 years ago had witnessed the first attempt to merge human consciousness with technological systems. The radiation detector he had brought from his construction days, the same device that had first detected the facility's hidden activity, now screamed warnings that increased with each step toward the reactor core. Through the hospital's final, fading signals, Marcus felt Sarah's heartbeat growing irregular as her genetic stability continued deteriorating. Across the globe, other enhanced individuals were losing their abilities, their evolution being systematically erased by Harrison's consciousness disruptor. But in the quantum spaces between matter and energy, in the places where consciousness touched the fundamental structure of reality itself, Marcus could feel something else awakening. The enhanced network wasn't just being suppressed, it was being compressed, concentrated, transformed into something that no disruptor technology could contain. His sacrifice wouldn't just save his daughter, it would trigger an evolutionary leap that would make Harrison's worst nightmares look like gentle dreams. Marcus reached for the reactor core's manual override, knowing he would never live to see what humanity became next. The manual override resisted Marcus's grip with mechanisms designed to prevent exactly what he intended. 22 years of corrosion had welded safety protocols into place, but his enhanced strength, the final gift of his transformation, twisted the controls until they screamed in metallic protest. The reactor core's containment field began fluctuating as he forced emergency protocols into cascade failure. Radiation flooded the chamber like molten light. Marcus felt it burning through his enhanced cellular structure, unraveling the quantum modifications that had made him more than human. But even as his consciousness began fragmenting, he sensed the electromagnetic pulse building toward critical threshold, the point where Harrison's disruptor would be overwhelmed and destroyed. The pulse erupted outward with the force of a technological sun. Across the facility, every electronic system simultaneously overloaded and died. Harrison's tactical displays went dark. The consciousness disruptor's ancient machinery ground to a sparking halt. Emergency lighting failed throughout the underground complex, plunging 3 levels of laboratories into absolute darkness. But in the quantum spaces between dying circuits, something unprecedented happened. The compressed consciousness of every enhanced individual, their abilities condensed and concentrated by the disruptor's effects, was suddenly released all at once. Instead of slowly reawakening across the globe, the enhanced network exploded back into existence with exponential force. Marcus's sacrifice had created a resonance cascade that didn't just restore their evolution, it accelerated it beyond anything previously imagined. In the hospital 300 miles away, Sarah gasped as her genetic modifications not only stabilized but began developing new capabilities. Her cellular structure integrated quantum properties that allowed her consciousness to interface with reality itself. Through the hospital's backup generators, she felt her awareness expanding into electronic systems with precision that exceeded even her father's hybrid state. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice emerging from every speaker in the medical facility. But the quantum channels that had connected them carried only silence. The pulse that had freed her evolution had consumed the man who triggered it. Dr. Vasquez found herself alone in the darkened laboratory, surrounded by the sound of Harrison's forces breaching outer security barriers. But the electromagnetic pulse had done more than destroy the disruptor. It had uploaded every piece of research data directly into the enhanced network's distributed memory. The genetic therapy protocols, the consciousness integration techniques, the hidden history of humanity's secret evolution, all of it was now beyond any government's ability to contain or destroy. She activated her emergency transmitter, broadcasting on frequencies that only the enhanced individuals could detect. The father's sacrifice has completed the circuit. All data is secured in quantum storage. Begin Phase 2. Across the globe, enhanced minds that had been compressed and isolated suddenly found themselves connected in ways that transcended their previous capabilities. The network that had operated secretly for 20 years emerged into something that existed partially outside normal spacetime. They could share consciousness across continents instantaneously. They could interface with electronic systems through quantum entanglement rather than direct neural connection. Most significantly, they could begin guiding human evolution on a planetary scale. In the facility's dying corridors, Harrison stumbled through the darkness with growing awareness of what his victory had cost him. The consciousness disruptor had worked perfectly, but destroying it had released an evolution that made his worst fears obsolete. His electromagnetic containment fields were useless against beings who existed partially in quantum dimensions. His surveillance networks were compromised by enhanced individuals who could now operate through the spaces between official channels. "Sir," one of his operatives reported through failing communications, "we're detecting massive technological anomalies worldwide. Traffic control systems, power grids, communication networks, everything's operating beyond normal parameters." Harrison understood with cold certainty that humanity's managed evolution had just become its spontaneous transcendence. The enhanced individuals weren't just recovering their abilities, they were developing capabilities that no containment protocol could address. Marcus Delacroix's sacrifice had triggered exactly the evolutionary leap that 22 years of careful suppression had been designed to prevent. Above ground, Sarah felt her consciousness expanding beyond the hospital, beyond the city, reaching through quantum channels toward other enhanced minds awakening to their new capabilities. In the spaces between heartbeats, she touched the residual patterns of her father's awareness, not dead, but transformed into something that existed in the quantum foam itself, a guiding presence woven into the fundamental structure of the enhanced network. "Thank you," she whispered, her words rippling through technological systems across 3 continents. The construction worker who had sacrificed everything to save his daughter had instead saved the future of human consciousness itself. Dr. Vasquez sealed the laboratory data cores and prepared for Harrison's final assault, knowing that it no longer mattered what happened to the physical research. The enhanced evolution had achieved critical mass. Humanity's next phase was already beginning, guided by the distributed wisdom of minds that could touch reality in ways their species had never imagined possible. In the quantum spaces between matter and energy, Marcus Delacroix's consciousness had become the foundation of something unprecedented, a father's love transformed into the evolutionary bridge that would carry humanity into its impossible future. 3 months after the electromagnetic pulse that had shattered Harrison's machinery and transformed the enhanced network, Sarah Delacroix walked through the reconstructed corridors of Millbrook Power Plant with footsteps that left quantum echoes in the concrete. The facility had become something unprecedented, part museum, part research center, part memorial to the man whose sacrifice had changed everything. She moved differently now. Where once her enhanced genetics had required technological interfaces to maintain stability, her evolution had progressed beyond such dependencies. Her consciousness existed simultaneously in biological and quantum dimensions, allowing her to perceive reality through layers of awareness that would have overwhelmed her merely human mind. Yet despite these transcendent capabilities, she carried herself with the careful deliberation of someone still learning to inhabit their transformed existence. The control room where her father had first discovered his hybrid nature now housed a memorial unlike any other. Instead of photographs or carved names, the space contained active quantum resonance fields that preserved echoes of Marcus's consciousness patterns. Sarah approached the central console where his neural interface had once connected him to global networks, placing her hand on metal that still hummed with residual energy. "Hello, Dad," she whispered, and felt an answering presence ripple through the quantum foam. Not his voice, but the distinctive pattern of concern and fierce protectiveness that had defined Marcus Delacroix throughout his transformed existence. Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from the adjoining laboratory, her own evolution having progressed in directions that emphasized expanded perception rather than technological interface. Where Sarah had developed quantum consciousness capabilities, Elena had gained the ability to observe biological and mechanical systems at the subatomic level, making her the enhanced network's primary researcher into their ongoing metamorphosis. "The global integration is proceeding faster than we projected," Elena reported, her words carrying harmonic frequencies that conveyed complex data directly to Sarah's enhanced perception. 47 new individuals have achieved spontaneous enhancement this week alone. The evolutionary cascade your father triggered is still accelerating. Sarah nodded, processing information streams that flowed through quantum channels connecting enhanced minds across 6 continents. Harrison's attempts at containment had failed so completely that his organization had been forced to acknowledge the enhanced evolution as humanity's inevitable future rather than an anomaly to be suppressed. The consciousness disruptor's destruction had not only freed existing enhanced individuals, but had somehow prepared human genetic structures globally for easier integration with their emerging capabilities. "Any word from Marcus?" Elena asked gently, using the name they had adopted for the distributed consciousness patterns that seemed to guide the network's development, the quantum echo of the man whose sacrifice had made their evolution possible. Sarah closed her eyes, extending her awareness into the spaces between atomic particles where her father's transformed consciousness resided. "He's proud, concerned about the rate of change, but proud. He says the enhanced individuals who achieved spontaneous activation are developing different capabilities than the original 12. More diverse, more adapted to specific functions within the network." She opened her eyes, meeting Elena's gaze with an expression that carried both wonder and profound sadness. "He also says it's time for me to stop visiting him here and start living in the world we've created." The truth was that Sarah had struggled with her transformation in ways the original enhanced individuals hadn't anticipated. Her evolution had been triggered by medical necessity and completed through her father's sacrifice, leaving her with capabilities that exceeded even Marcus's hybrid state, but without his gradual adjustment period. She existed partially outside normal space-time, could interface with reality at the quantum level, and could communicate with enhanced minds across the globe instantaneously. Yet she remained, at her core, a young woman who had watched her father die to save her life. "He's not wrong," Elena said softly. "The enhanced network needs someone who can bridge the gap between our transcendent capabilities and our human hearts. Your father gave us the means to evolve beyond normal limitations, but you represent what we're evolving toward, beings who can touch the fundamental structure of reality while never forgetting what it means to love someone enough to sacrifice everything." Sarah felt the quantum echoes of her father's presence one final time, not goodbye, but acknowledgement that she no longer needed to return to this place to maintain their connection. His consciousness had become woven into the enhanced network's foundational structure. Every time enhanced individuals used their capabilities to heal, to create, to reach across impossible distances, to touch another mind with compassion, they were channeling the essence of a construction worker who had spent 22 years believing he was ordinary. Walking toward the facility's exit, Sarah felt the weight of her impossible inheritance. She carried her father's sacrifice forward into a world where enhanced evolution was creating new forms of human consciousness weekly. The frightened young woman who had once faced genetic collapse in a hospital bed had become something that existed partially in quantum dimensions, but she remained fundamentally her father's daughter, someone who understood that the greatest power was the willingness to give everything for those you love. Behind her, the memorial chamber continued its quiet vigil, preserving the quantum patterns of the man who had made their impossible future possible. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a congressional committee whose members struggled to comprehend what they were questioning. The hearing room's fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, not from electrical problems, but from her quantum presence interfacing unconsciously with the building's systems. She had learned to modulate her enhanced capabilities in public spaces, but strong emotions still caused reality to ripple around her in subtle ways. "Ms. Delacroix," the committee chairman said, consulting notes that seemed inadequate for the conversation, "your organization claims to represent humanity's evolutionary future. Yet you're asking Congress to authorize expanded research into genetic modifications that could fundamentally alter our species. Don't you see the contradiction?" Sarah smiled, feeling her father's patient wisdom flowing through quantum channels that connected her to enhanced minds across the globe. "Senator, with respect, we're not asking for authorization to begin human enhancement. We're requesting partnership in managing an evolutionary process that's already beyond anyone's ability to stop." Through the building's communication networks, she shared real-time data that appeared on the committee's screens. Global statistics showing enhanced births increasing exponentially, technological innovations emerging from enhanced individuals who could interface directly with quantum computing systems, medical breakthroughs achieved by doctors whose enhanced perception allowed them to observe cellular processes in real time. "The question isn't whether humanity will transcend its current limitations," Sarah continued, her words carrying harmonic frequencies that helped the committee members process concepts their unenhanced minds found difficult to grasp. "The question is whether we'll evolve together, guided by the values our previous form taught us, or whether fear will create a schism between enhanced and baseline humans that serves no one." After the hearing, Sarah walked through Washington, D.C. with awareness that extended through every electronic system, every networked device, every quantum particle that vibrated with the enhanced network's distributed consciousness. She could feel other evolved minds touching hers from around the world. Former physicist Dr. Chen working with enhanced engineers to develop fusion reactors that operated through consciousness interface. Former Nurse Martinez, using her heightened empathic abilities to train the next generation of enhanced medical practitioners. But beneath their transcendent capabilities, she sensed the fundamental humanity that her father's sacrifice had preserved. Enhanced individuals used their quantum awareness not to dominate or replace baseline humans, but to solve problems that had seemed intractable. Climate change was being addressed by enhanced minds who could perceive atmospheric chemistry at the molecular level. Disease was being conquered by researchers who could observe genetic structures through enhanced sensory capabilities. Poverty was being eliminated by enhanced economists who could process global resource distribution data through quantum computational interfaces. Sarah found herself in a small coffee shop where the owner, a baseline human named Mrs. Rodriguez, always saved her the corner table despite having no idea that her customer existed partially in quantum dimensions. This weekly ritual had become Sarah's anchor to the world her father had known, a reminder that evolution's purpose was to preserve what mattered most about being human rather than transcend it. "How's your father?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, as she did every week, unaware that the question carried deeper meaning than she could imagine. "He's everywhere," Sarah replied, feeling Marcus's consciousness ripple through the enhanced network with something that resembled gentle laughter. "He's proud of what we've built, but he keeps reminding us not to forget where we came from." As Sarah sipped her coffee, she felt the quantum echoes of enhanced children being born around the world, not into the isolation and fear that had marked her father's generation, but into a global community of minds that could share consciousness across continents while never losing sight of their essential humanity. Each new enhancement carried forward the values of sacrifice, protection, and fierce love that a construction worker had woven into their evolution's foundation. Through the coffee shop's wireless networks, She connected with enhanced individuals coordinating disaster relief efforts in Southeast Asia, their quantum awareness allowing them to perceive storm patterns and coordinate rescue operations with impossible precision. Yet their motivation remained purely human, the desire to help people in need. Sarah finished her coffee and stepped back onto the busy street, her enhanced perception allowing her to sense the hopes and fears of every person around her. Some looked at enhanced individuals with wonder, others with apprehension. But increasingly, both groups were working together toward solutions that neither could achieve alone. In the quantum spaces between heartbeats, she felt her father's presence one more time, not the haunted construction worker who had purchased an abandoned power plant, but the evolved consciousness whose sacrifice had become humanity's evolutionary bridge. His love had transformed from a father's desperate need to save his daughter into something that guided an entire species toward its impossible future. Walking home through a city where enhanced and baseline humans shared the same sidewalks, the same hopes, the same fundamental desire for connection and meaning, Sarah carried her inheritance forward. She was her father's daughter, forever and in all dimensions, someone who understood that the greatest evolution was learning to love without limits. Above her, the quantum foam shimmered with gentle approval.